There are moments in life that arrive without warning and rewrite everything you thought you knew about yourself. Not the dramatic ones you see coming from miles away, the slow-building storms, the arguments that have been circling for weeks. No. The moments that truly change you are the quiet, humiliating ones. The ones that happen in public, in front of strangers who look away because they don't want to get involved. The ones where you have to decide, in real time, who you are going to be. Piper had been deciding that her whole life. She was 28 years old, a contract architect working for a mid-sized firm in Atlanta, and she had spent the last 11 days in London closing what was, without question, the most significant project of her career, a mixed-use cultural complex in Brixton that would take 3 years to build and had her name attached to every blueprint. She had barely slept. She had eaten too many meals standing over hotel sinks. She had sent approximately 400 emails and had been on the phone so many times that her right ear had developed a dull, persistent ache. But she had closed it. She had actually closed it. She deserved the seat. She had used almost every point she had ever accumulated, years of business travel, years of choosing the same airline out of quiet, stubborn loyalty, to book a first-class seat from London Heathrow to Atlanta. One seat. One upgrade. One long-haul flight where she could sleep horizontally for the first time in nearly 2 weeks and land looking like a professional instead of a woman who had survived something. She had been so careful about it. She had checked in online the night before. She had arrived at the gate with 50 minutes to spare. She had her boarding pass on her phone, her passport in her hand. She had done everything right. That was the part that would stay with her longest, how carefully she had done everything right, and how little it had mattered. The gate agent's name tag said Derek. He was in his mid-40s, with the particular energy of a man who had been given a small amount of authority and had decided it defined him. He glanced at Piper's boarding pass the way someone might glance at an unexpected bill, a flicker of surprise, quickly concealed, replaced by professional neutrality that wasn't quite neutral enough. "I'm sorry," he said, though his voice carried no apology in it. "There seems to be an issue with this seat." Piper looked at him. "What kind of issue?" "The seat has been reassigned." She kept her voice level. It was a practiced calm, the kind she had built over years of being the only woman in rooms, often the only black woman, the one who had to work twice as hard to be taken at her word. "Reassigned to whom?" "I checked in last night. I have a confirmed seat." Derek tapped at his keyboard with the theatrical concentration of someone performing competence. "The system shows a conflict. We're going to need to move you to economy." "I'm not moving to economy." He looked up. Something shifted in his expression, not quite surprise, but a recalibration. "Ma'am. My name is Piper. And I have a confirmed, paid, first-class seat on this flight. I need you to explain to me exactly what system conflict would override a confirmed booking." Behind her, she was aware of the queue. She was aware of the other passengers. She kept her spine straight in her voice even and her eyes on Derek's face, because she had learned long ago that the moment you looked away, they took it as surrender. Derek's jaw tightened. "I understand your frustration." "I'm not frustrated. I'm asking a question. The seat has been requested by another passenger. A premium passenger." The words sat in the air between them. Premium, as if her points, her years of loyalty, her confirmed booking, her money, somehow added up to less than whatever that word meant when applied to someone else. "I would like to speak with a supervisor," Piper said. Derek picked up his phone. Made a show of it. The queue behind her shifted, restless. Someone sighed, not loudly, but loud enough to be a message. She didn't turn around. She didn't know, then, that the man who had triggered the seat conflict was standing 20 feet behind her, watching the entire exchange. Stepan Eliashin had not intended to be on this flight. He had intended to be on his private plane, a Gulfstream G700 that was currently sitting at a private terminal at Farnborough with a hydraulic fault that his engineer had discovered 3 hours ago. He had intended to be back in Moscow by tomorrow. He had intended a great many things that the last 72 hours had quietly dismantled. He was 41 years old. He was, depending on who you asked, the head of a private investment conglomerate with interests across 6 countries, or the most powerful figure in a network of businesses that operated in the spaces between legality and convenience. Both descriptions were accurate. Neither was complete. He had the kind of face that photographers loved and subjects feared, angular and composed, with pale gray eyes that registered everything and revealed very little. He wore a charcoal suit that had been made for him by a tailor in St. Petersburg who had been making suits for his family for 30 years. He did not, as a rule, fly commercial. He had called ahead. His assistant had called the airline. Arrangements had been made, or so he had been told. He watched the woman at the gate argue with the gate agent and felt something he rarely felt in professional situations, discomfort. Not because the situation was unfamiliar. He had been on the receiving end of arrangements like this his whole life, had made arrangements like this, had moved through the world as someone whose requests were simply accommodated. The discomfort came from watching it happen from the outside, watching the mechanism of it, the small, grinding machinery of someone else being displaced. She was not backing down. He noticed that first. Most people, confronted with bureaucratic authority and an impatient queue, would have taken the path of least resistance. Would have been moved, folded, absorbed into the system's preference. This woman stood as if the floor beneath her was entirely stable, as if she had all the time in the world, as if Derek and his keyboard and his premium passenger designation were simply a problem to be solved rather than a force to be yielded to. He noticed, second, the quality of her stillness. The way she held herself, not tense, but contained. The way her hands weren't clenched. The way her voice, even from 20 feet away, had a particular measured quality. She was controlling something. She was choosing, in real time, exactly how much of herself to show. He took out his phone. Called his assistant. Said 3 sentences. Hung up. Then he walked forward. Piper heard footsteps stop beside her before she saw him. She turned. He was tall, she registered that first. Then the suit. Then the eyes, which were the color of winter sky and looked at her with a directness that was somehow different from Derek's brand of appraisal. This man wasn't assessing whether she belonged. He was just, looking. Taking her in with a frankness that was almost disconcerting. "I apologize," he said. His English was precise, slightly formal, carrying the architectural remnants of Russian beneath it. "The seat conflict is my fault." She stared at him. "Excuse me?" "My assistant made a request on my behalf." It was, he paused, as if choosing the word with care, poorly handled. Derek materialized between them, slightly flustered. "Mr. Eliashin, we have the upgrade ready." "Cancel it." Stepan didn't look at Derek when he said it. He kept his eyes on Piper. "The seat is hers. She had it first." A beat of silence in which the whole gate area seemed to hold its breath. "Sir," Derek began, "the arrangements were a mistake." A pause. "Give her the seat." Piper looked at this man for a long moment. She was trying to identify what she was feeling, which was more complicated than it should have been. There was relief, the boarding pass was hers, the seat was hers, the outcome she'd been calmly insisting on had arrived. But relief wasn't the primary thing. The primary thing was something sharper, something that needed to be handled carefully. "I don't need you to give me anything," she said. "It was already mine." Something moved in his expression. Not quite amusement. Something more respectful than that. "You're right," he said. It was. She looked at him for another second, that measuring look that she gave to blueprints, to clients who said one thing and meant another, to any situation that required her to understand exactly what was in front of her before she committed. Then she turned back to Derek, who was already reprocessing her boarding pass with the resigned efficiency of a man whose small authority had just been outranked. "Thank you," she said to Derek, because she had been raised to say thank you even when it cost her something. Then she walked to the jetway without looking back at the man in the charcoal suit. She didn't need to look back. She could feel him watching. The first-class cabin of a transatlantic flight has its own grammar, a particular language of reclined seats and drawn dividers and flight attendants who speak in low, unhurried tones. Piper settled into her seat by the window, accepted a glass of water she didn't particularly want, and exhaled for what felt like the first time in 11 days. She was nearly asleep when she heard the seat beside hers, the aisle seat of her row, which had appeared empty on the seat map, except its passenger. She opened her eyes. He didn't look at her immediately. He was adjusting something on his phone, and there was a practiced quality to the way he moved through a first-class cabin, unhurried, proprietorial. A man who had been in these spaces so often they'd stopped registering. "You took the seat next to me," she said. He looked up then. It was available. The whole cabin was mostly available. A pause. Yes. No apology in it. No pretense. Just an acknowledgement that he had made a choice. She looked at him. Why? He was quiet for a moment in a way that felt considered rather than evasive. I wanted to apologize properly. Without an audience. You already apologized. I apologized for the incident. I haven't apologized for the principle of it. She turned that over. Outside the window, the tarmac was gray and bright under the November sky. Ground crew moved past in their orange vests. The plane shuddered faintly as something engaged in the belly of it. What's the principle of it? She asked. That the way it happened, another pause, another careful word selection, was not acceptable. Regardless of the outcome. She studied him. He had the face of someone who gave very few things away, but there was something in the directness of his speech, the absence of social lubrication, of smooth deflection, that felt like a different kind of honesty. He wasn't performing remorse. He was stating a position. Stepan Ilyashin, he said, after a moment. I know, she said. Derek said your name. And yours? Piper. Just Piper? For now. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. The architecture of one. The safety demonstration began. They both watched the flight attendant with the practiced, slightly blank attention of frequent flyers. As the plane began to move, Piper felt the knot in her shoulders loosen 1 increment, 1 degree closer to the rest she'd been promising herself for 11 days. She thought she would sleep. She did not, for a very long time, sleep. It started because of turbulence over the Atlantic, a 40-minute stretch of rough air that rattled the overhead bins and turned the cabin's quiet hum anxious. Piper was not particularly afraid of flying, but she discovered in that moment, more tired than she'd realized, and fear and exhaustion in combination produce a particular kind of vulnerability she hadn't budgeted for. She gripped the armrest. Not dramatically. Just firmly. It's nothing, Stepan said. His voice was calm with the specific quality of someone who has been in genuinely dangerous situations and knows the difference. Jet stream. It will pass in. He glanced at something on his watch, 12 minutes, approximately. You can tell that from your watch? From experience. A beat. I've flown this route many times. The plane dropped 2 feet and recovered. Piper exhaled through her nose. Tell me something, she said. It came out without full planning, tiredness loosening the usual editorial control. To pass the time. He looked at her with what might have been surprise. Then he settled back slightly, as if something had been given permission to relax. What kind of something? Anything that isn't about turbulence. He was quiet for a moment, and she thought she'd miscalculated, that this man who had been so direct about practical matters might not be the kind of person who told anything, about anything, to a stranger on a plane. Then he said, when I was 19, I worked for 3 months on a fishing vessel in the Barents Sea. Winter. The worst conditions I have ever been in, before or since. The boat was old. The captain was unreasonable. The water was, he paused, the color of the sky right now, but moving. She looked at the window, at the blue-gray Atlantic below the cloud layer. Why were you on a fishing boat? Circumstances. A word that carried its own locked room. The point is, I was afraid, every single day. Not of dying, exactly. Of the water. Of what was under it. Of the feeling that beneath you there was something unimaginably large and indifferent. The turbulence shuddered through the plane again. Piper held the armrest. That is not helping, she said. He turned to look at her, and she saw it again, that thing that wasn't quite amusement but was adjacent to warmth. What I meant to say was, I was afraid every day. And every day passed. And here I am. She looked at him. Here you are. Here I am. The turbulence eased. Not gone, but lighter, the plane finding its way back to steadiness. The armrest under Piper's hand slowly stopped being a lifeline and became just an armrest again. What are you going back to? Stepan asked. The question was quiet, conversational, but there was genuine curiosity in it. Home, she said. Work. 12 plants I've been neglecting for 11 days. Plants. I have a lot of them. My apartment looks like something made a decision. She paused. What are you going back to? Moscow, eventually. I have, he considered the word, obligations. That's a careful word. It's an accurate one. She looked at him sideways. What do you do, Stepan Ilyashin? Exactly. He met her gaze. There was something in the pause, not deception exactly, but a kind of considered weighing. I manage interests, he said. Many kinds. That's even more careful than obligations. Some things require care. She filed that away. She had a gift, or a habit, depending on how you looked at it, for reading the space between what people said and what they meant. Buildings, she always thought, were the most honest things in the world because they couldn't lie about their structure. People were more complicated. This man was very complicated. But she was too tired, finally, to pursue it. She reclined her seat. Pulled the blanket up. Said, into the dimmed cabin air, wake me if we're going down. A pause. Then, very quietly, you'll be the first to know. She slept. She woke to Atlanta written in the amber geometry of night spread below them, and for a moment, that beautiful, disoriented moment between sleep and arrival, she didn't know where she was. Then she did. Then she remembered everything. She turned her head. He was awake, had probably been awake for hours, reading something on his phone with the focused stillness of a man accustomed to long silences. He noticed she'd moved and set the phone down. Atlanta, he said. I see it. She sat up, adjusted herself back into the architecture of wakefulness. Through the window, the city glittered with the specific generosity of a place that doesn't know it's being looked at. You're connecting? I'm staying 2 days. Meetings. She nodded. Reached for her water. You never told me what the premium arrangement actually meant. What was it they were doing for you? He was quiet for a moment. Clearing the entire first-class cabin. She set the water down. Turned to look at him. The entire cabin. I sometimes travel with, a word selected, security considerations. You bought the whole plane. The first-class section of it. She absorbed this. Outside, Atlanta was getting closer, the lights separating into streets and intersections and the particular grid of a city she knew by feel. And what happens to the people who had those seats? They are moved to business class, with full upgrades and compensation. But that's not what happened to me. No. The word carried weight. What happened to you was different. You were moved down. Not compensated equivalently. The situation was, he turned and looked at her directly, handled incorrectly, and for that I am genuinely sorry. She looked at him for a long moment. I believe you, she said. And she did. That was the strange thing. She had spent 11 days in rooms full of people performing sincerity, and this man's apology had none of that performance in it. It was just a statement, delivered cleanly, without expectation. Can I ask you something? She said. Yes. If I hadn't pushed back, if I'd just gone to economy, would you have known? Would anyone have told you what happened to me specifically? A pause that told her everything. No, he said. She nodded slowly. That's what I thought. The fasten seatbelt sign illuminated. The cabin began its gentle consolidation around descent. Piper. He said her name for the first time, and it had a different quality in his mouth than it had in her own head, something more deliberate about it. Would you have coffee with me? Tomorrow, or whenever you're free. Not, he paused, and she saw him navigate something, not an obligation. Just a conversation I'm not ready to end. She looked at the city below them. I'll think about it, she said. She could feel him understand that this was not a dismissal. She thought about it for exactly 18 hours, which she told herself was reasonable and told nobody else was because there was nobody to tell. She thought about it while she watered her 12 plants, 11 had survived. She gave the dead succulent a brief, private eulogy. She thought about it while she showered and slept for 9 hours and woke up feeling, for the first time in weeks, like herself. She thought about it while she made coffee and stood at her kitchen window and watched Atlanta do its morning thing below her. She thought about the careful word obligations. She thought about the locked room in his voice when he'd said circumstances. She thought about a man who bought the first-class cabin of a commercial flight as a security measure, and what that implied about the kinds of people who needed to be kept at that kind of distance. She also thought about the turbulence. About the story of the Barents delivered in a voice that had held no drama and no vanity, just the simple fact of, I was afraid every day. And every day passed, about the way he had watched her sleep. She hadn't known it at the time, but she'd woken once, briefly, and he'd been looking at her with an expression she didn't have a word for yet. She texted the number he'd written on the back of a boarding pass stub. Coffee. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. I'll pick the place, His reply came in 4 seconds. Yes. The place she picked was a coffee shop in Inman Park that she'd been going to for 6 years, the kind of place with mismatched furniture and genuinely good espresso and a playlist that had enough sense to stay in the background. She arrived first, intentionally, and claimed a corner table that gave her a sightline to the door. He arrived at exactly 10. She noticed, entering, that his eyes swept the room in a specific sequence, exits, occupants, points of vulnerability, before they found her. It was so fast she would have missed it if she hadn't been looking. But she had been looking. He sat across from her. He was in a dark navy sweater and dark trousers, and without the suit he looked, not softer, exactly. More dimensional. Like a building that reads differently in different light. You chose well, he said, looking around. I know this city. I can tell. He picked up the menu even though she suspected he already knew what he wanted. You've been here long? Born here. Left for school, came back. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. You said meetings. What kind of meetings happen in Atlanta? He looked up from the menu. Real estate, primarily. There are acquisition opportunities in the logistics corridor near the airport. I know that corridor. I've done conceptual work out there. For which firm? She told him. He nodded with the recognition of someone who had encountered the name in a context she wasn't privy to. You're good, he said. Not a compliment fishing for a response. A fact he'd sourced from somewhere. You looked me up. After the plane. Yes. A beat. Was that wrong of you to do? Do you usually ask for permission after the fact? The architecture of a smile again. Rarely. She leaned back. What did you find? That you're the lead architect on the Brixton project, which is a significant commission for someone your age. That you started your own practice briefly, 4 years ago, before joining your current firm. That you've won 2 regional design awards and been shortlisted for a 3rd. He paused. And that your apartment building in Old Fourth Ward is one that I actually know. I looked at acquiring it 2 years ago. She stared at him. You almost bought my building. I decided against it. The numbers didn't justify the work. A pause. I'm glad now that I didn't. She held his gaze for a moment. There was something happening in the air between them, not quite the turbulence of the plane, but related to it. A low-frequency vibration that required attention. You're a dangerous man to know, she said. She kept her voice conversational. He didn't look away. That's a fair assessment. I'm not asking you to deny it. Good. A pause. I would have found it difficult. She looked at him. So what is this? What are we doing here? He was quiet for a moment with the quality of thought, not avoidance. I'm not sure, he said finally. That's unusual for me. I'm usually very sure. And I find I don't mind it. That's even more unusual. She looked out the window at the street, the trees in their November nakedness, the pedestrians with their coffee cups and their morning purposes. Then she looked back at him. Tell me about Moscow, she said. And he did. The 2 days became 4. This happened incrementally, the way things that change your life tend to happen, not in a declaration, not in a moment of decision, but in the accumulation of small choices that only look inevitable in retrospect. The meetings he'd cited extended, as meetings do when the other party senses leverage. He did not particularly mind. He rescheduled calls. He had his assistant push 2 appointments by 48 hours. He told himself it was because Atlanta presented opportunities he hadn't fully assessed. He knew, with the part of him that didn't deal in self-deception, that this was not the primary reason. She showed him the city. Not the tourist infrastructure of it, not the obvious landmarks and the curated experiences designed for people passing through. She showed him the city she actually lived in, the morning market in Pond City where she bought the kind of coffee you couldn't get in hotels, the stretch of the Beltline where she ran when she needed to think, the bookshop in Little 5 Points where the owner knew her name and her reading habits. The Brixton Project was the commission that had made her reputation, but Atlanta was the place that had made her. He walked with her and listened with the focused attention of a man who didn't perform listening. When he asked questions they were specific, not the social lubricant questions of someone filling silence, but questions that indicated he'd been tracking the conversation's real content. She found herself saying things she hadn't said to people she'd known for years. On the 3rd evening, they had dinner at a restaurant she'd been saving for a meaningful occasion without articulating what that occasion might be. He ordered in a way that suggested he'd spent time in good restaurants without being perform about it. They talked until the staff began making the delicate gestures of a place that wants to close. Walking back to her neighborhood, he was staying at a hotel 12 blocks from her apartment, a detail that she had not pointed out to him and he had not pointed out to her. She said, "Tell me what you're not telling me." He was quiet for half a block. "What specifically would you like to know?" "The thing that makes you buy the first-class section of commercial flights. The thing that makes you sweep a coffee shop when you walk in. The obligations." She paused. "I'm not naive, Stepan. I've spent 11 days in rooms where I was the only one who didn't know all the information, and I'm very good at working out what's missing." He looked at the street ahead of them. The amber light of the lamps. The quiet November trees. "My family has operated in Russia for 3 generations, he said slowly. In industries that require, the word again, care. Relationships with certain structures of power. The management of things that cannot be managed through ordinary channels." A pause. "My father's generation did it one way. His father's generation another. I have tried to modernize, to move the center of gravity toward things that are defensible in daylight. Tried. The past is not easily modernized." She let that sit for a moment. "Are you telling me you're dangerous, or that you used to be, or that the distinction doesn't hold the way you'd like it to?" He looked at her. The streetlight caught his face at an angle that made it look carved. "I'm telling you," he said carefully, "that I don't want to lie to you. And that not lying requires saying, there are parts of my world that are not safe, and not clean, and not something I can entirely step away from. Not yet." A pause. "Possibly not ever." She held his gaze. "I appreciate you not lying. And I'm still here." They stood on the street corner for a moment, the city breathing quietly around them. He was looking at her with that expression she hadn't found a word for on the plane. She was starting to, now. It was the expression of a man who had stopped expecting something and found it anyway. Piper, he said. Just her name. The single word carrying the weight of the 3 days. Don't, she said gently. Not yet. He understood. She could see that he understood, that yet was not no, and that she wasn't retreating, just asking for the appropriate amount of time to walk towards something at a speed that felt like her own. They said goodnight on her corner. She went upstairs. She stood in her kitchen with her 11 surviving plants and the city outside her window and felt the particular aliveness of a person who has been found by something unexpected. She didn't hear from him the next morning. This was not alarming in itself. She didn't expect hourly contact, had no implicit agreement about the rhythm of communication. But by afternoon, when the silence had extended past a certain natural threshold, she found herself checking her phone with a frequency she wasn't comfortable with. By evening, she called the number. It rang twice and went to a voice that was not his, a male voice, clipped, saying the number was unavailable. She sat with this for an hour. She was not, she told herself, a woman who catastrophized. She dealt in structures and load-bearing facts. She did not construct anxious narratives from absences. But she thought about the swept room. The security measures. The past that wasn't easily modernized. At 9:15, her phone rang from an unknown number. It's me. His voice was the same, but something in the register had changed, not fear exactly, but the sound of someone operating under pressure with extreme composure. I'm sorry about today. What happened? A pause. Complication. I can't be specific on this line. Are you safe? Yes. A beat. You asked that first. I noticed. A silence in which something was communicated that neither of them was quite saying. I need to leave tonight, he said. Earlier than planned. Okay. I didn't want to disappear without a pause, and she heard in it the difficulty of a man for whom directness came naturally, but this particular kind of directness was new, without telling you that these 4 days were something I didn't expect. And that I don't want them to simply end. She looked at her plants. Her city. Her carefully built life. They don't have to end, she said. Another silence. Then, I'm going to send someone to your building tonight. Just for the next few days. Don't be alarmed, it's a precaution, and it has nothing to do with any threat to you specifically. Stepan. I know. I know it's a lot to ask without explaining. A pause, I would not forgive myself if the proximity to me created a problem for you. She sat with that for a moment. The weight of it. The fact that this was what the life looked like, not just in the abstract, but concretely, unknown numbers, early departures, precautions that couldn't be explained over the phone. I don't need protection, she said. I know. But I understand why you're offering it. That's all I'm asking. She exhaled. Go deal with your complication. Text me when you land. Yes. And Stepan? A pause. The 4 days were something I didn't expect either. She heard his breathing change very slightly. Then, I'll text you when I land. He did. It was 3 words, asterisk landed. You're right, asterisk. She stared at that for a long time before she understood what he meant. You're right, she hadn't said anything that could be corrected or confirmed. She'd said the 4 days were something unexpected. So what he was saying, in those 2 words, was, asterisk yes. They were, asterisk. She put the phone down and looked at the city, which was doing its usual blazing indifferent thing outside her window, entirely unconcerned with what was happening to her. The weeks that followed had their own particular shape. He was in Moscow. She was in Atlanta, and then in Chicago for a site visit, and then back in Atlanta. They spoke on the phone in the evenings, with a regularity that established itself without being discussed, not every evening, but most of them, at times that accounted for the 8-hour difference between their cities. He called when he could, she answered when she could. The gaps were filled with texts that were short and direct and sometimes, unexpectedly, funny. She learned him in installments. She learned that he slept very little, 4 hours, sometimes 5, a habit built over years that he'd stopped trying to change. She learned that he read constantly, mostly history and engineering, and that he had opinions about Russian constructivist architecture that were more sophisticated than she would have predicted. She learned that his mother was still alive, living in St. Petersburg, and that he spoke to her every Sunday morning with a regularity that was the most unguarded thing she discovered about him. He learned her in installments too. He learned that she made decisions slowly and almost never reversed them, which he said was the most architecturally sensible personal philosophy he'd encountered. He learned that she'd started her own practice at 24 and walked away from it at 28, not because she'd failed but because she'd realized she was building the wrong kind of thing, chasing commissions that paid well but didn't interest her, and that interest was non-negotiable. He learned that she was funny in a quiet, sideways manner that came out after the first hour of a conversation and didn't appear before it. 3 weeks in, he said, "I want to see you." She said, "When?" "I can be in Atlanta by Friday." She said, "Okay." He came. He stayed 4 days. They went back to the Beltline and the market and the bookshop where the owner knew her name, and this time the city had a different texture because someone else was seeing it, and that person's way of seeing it added something she hadn't expected. He was quiet and observant and occasionally, surprisingly delighted by things, a piece of ironwork on a building facade, a particular angle of afternoon light, a fact she mentioned about the geology under the city that he turned over in his mind for 10 minutes. On the third night, sitting on her apartment floor because the couch wasn't big enough for a conversation that needed room, she said, "This is complicated." "Yes. I'm not saying that to give us an out. I'm saying it because I think we should know what we're walking into." He looked at her. "What are we walking into?" She looked at her hands. Then at him. "Something real, I think. Which means the complications matter. Which means I need to know, not everything, I'm not asking for everything, but I need to know what the relevant risks are. To me. To anyone around me. Not because I want to run from them, but because I don't make structural decisions without knowing what's load-bearing." He was quiet for a long moment. "That's the most fair thing anyone has ever asked of me," he said. And I will tell you." A pause. "Not tonight. There are things that require context I can't give you in one conversation. But I will tell you. All of it that matters." She looked at him. "Okay. You trust that?" "I trust that you haven't lied to me yet. Which is more than I can say for most people after 3 weeks." He looked at her with the expression she had a word for now, recognition. The look of a man who had been found, unexpectedly, exactly where he was. He told her over the course of 3 more conversations, distributed across as many weeks, calibrated by his own judgment of what needed context and what could stand alone. He told her about the network, not its operational details, but its nature. The web of men and obligations and history that had grown around his family over decades, that he had inherited as much as chosen, that he had spent the last 8 years trying to gradually, carefully, reorient towards something that could exist in daylight. He told her about the specific threat that had pulled him out of Atlanta in November, a former associate who had made certain claims about certain assets, and whose claims required delicate management of a kind that couldn't be done over the phone. He told her the situation had been resolved, not cleanly, but conclusively. He told her that the man at her building had been there for 10 days and then withdrawn when the situation was closed. She listened. She asked specific questions. She didn't perform shock or horror, because she had already, on the street corner 3 weeks ago, made the decision to understand rather than retreat. She asked about the people around him, not as an audit of his conscience, but as architecture. She wanted to know the structure, the load-bearing elements, where the weight actually sat. When he finished, she said, "What are you working toward?" "A legitimate structure. One that can be handed off, or closed, in a way that doesn't require the next generation to inherit what this generation inherited." "And the timeline?" 2 to 4 years. "If nothing complicates it." "Things will complicate it." "Yes. But the direction is fixed." He paused. It's the only thing I've been sure of, in this world, for a long time. She looked at him. And us? Are you sure about that? He looked back at her steadily. I'm sure that I have not been this honest with another person since my mother, and that I haven't wanted to be. I'm sure that you are the most load-bearing thing in my life right now that wasn't there 6 weeks ago, and that I intend to be worthy of that. A pause. Is that sure enough? She thought about it. She genuinely, actually thought about it, not performing consideration but exercising it, the way she exercised it when she was looking at a building and deciding whether its bones were good. Come here, she said. He moved across the floor to her. She put her hands on either side of his face, that angular, composed face that had looked at her at a London gate with no judgment and then followed her onto a plane and then into a coffee shop and then into her city and then into her life, and she kissed him for the first time, slowly, with the particular intention of someone who has thought about a thing carefully before doing it. He kissed her back with a quietness that had nothing restrained about it. As if everything he usually held back had been, specifically, waiting for permission. They stayed on the floor of her apartment while the city glowed outside the window, and she thought, here is the thing about buildings. The ones that last are the ones that were honest about their own weight from the beginning, It was her assistant, 6 weeks later, who first pointed it out. There's a story running, Maya said, setting her phone on Piper's desk with the expression of someone delivering complicated news. About you and Stepan Ilyashin. Piper looked at the screen. It was a gossip item, one of those parasitic aggregators that fed on the images and associations of people who moved in certain circles. There was a photograph, taken without either of them knowing, of them on the Beltline on his second visit. Her face was fully visible. His was partially turned away. The headline was about his network. About her. About association and implication. She sat with it for a moment. Then she called him. I've seen it, he said immediately. He sounded controlled in the specific way she now recognized as him managing something he was genuinely angry about. How bad is it? The image is real. The context is fabricated. Manageable, legally. A pause. I'm sorry. This is what I told you about. You told me there were risks. I told you. But telling and experiencing are different. She looked at the window of her office, the familiar skyline, the city she'd built herself into. I know, she said. I'm not calling to blame you. I'm calling because I need to know what to do. Nothing, he said. Do nothing. My legal team is handling the source. It will be gone in 72 hours. And after it's gone? A pause. There will be others. Occasionally. Less frequently as the situation evolves. I can't promise it will never happen again. She thought about this. She thought about structures and what they could hold and what they couldn't and what the difference was between a load-bearing wall and one you could take down without consequence. Stepan, she said. I'm not made of glass. A long silence. I know, he said quietly. So stop apologizing for things that are part of what we chose and start telling me what comes next. Another silence, and she heard in it something shift, some adjustment in him, some recalibration of a man who had spent a long time protecting people at the cost of including them. What comes next, he said slowly, is that in approximately 60 days, I will be in Atlanta for 6 weeks. Consecutive. Because the acquisition I mentioned, the logistics corridor, is moving forward. And because, a pause, I want to be in the same city as you for more than 4 days at a time. 6 weeks. If that's acceptable. She looked at her skyline. Her city. Her 12 plants, all 12 now, because she'd replaced the succulent in November, quietly, while thinking about a man on a plane. It's acceptable, she said. She could hear him breathe. Piper. Yes. Thank you. And it was those 2 words, with everything in them, not gratitude for agreement, but for something larger, something that had started at a gate in Heathrow when she had stood straight and refused to be moved by someone who had no right to move her, that made her feel the full weight of what they had built together. The load-bearing fact of it. Go deal with your legal team, she said. Text me when it's done. He did, exactly 71 hours later, done. Coming in 60 days. Don't reassign the seat, She laughed for the first time in 2 days, in her office, alone with her skyline and her work and her complicated life. She texted back, the seat is yours. You paid for it, His reply took 4 seconds, as it always had from the first, worth every penny. She put the phone down and looked at her blueprints and thought, this is what it looks like. Not the fairy tale version, not the curated version, not the version where everything is clean and the complications are cosmetic. The real version, where the things that are worth building require honest assessment of what they're made of, and the willingness to look at the load-bearing walls and say, yes. This holds, She picked up her pencil. Returned to the work. Let Atlanta do its blazing, indifferent thing outside her window. She had a building to design. She had a man in Moscow who would be in her city in 60 days. She had 11 plants that were, finally, entirely fine. She was, she thought, entirely fine too. More than fine. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. Hi my loves. If you made it here, all the way to the end, I want you to know that means something to me. Genuinely. Because this one wasn't easy to write, and I think that's partly why it matters. I wanted to write a story about a woman who doesn't budge. Not because she's performing strength, or trying to prove something to anyone watching, but because she knows what's hers. She knows what she's earned. And when the world tries to move her, at an airport gate, in a complicated romance, in a life that keeps asking her to decide who she is, she just stays. Grounded. Herself. Piper is not a perfect character. She makes choices that are risky and she knows they're risky and she makes them anyway with her eyes open. I love her for that. I love that she asks to understand things rather than asking to be protected from them. I love that she uses the word load-bearing about the people in her life because that's actually how the best of us think. Not does this feel good right now but will this hold? And Stepan. Oh, Stepan. He's a man trying to move something very heavy in a different direction, and he's doing it slowly, imperfectly, with the full awareness that he might not make it all the way. But he's honest. And for me, for Piper too, I think, that honesty is the thing that makes everything else possible. Thank you for sitting with this story. Thank you for caring about these two people I made up in my head and couldn't stop thinking about until I wrote them down. If this story found you at a moment when you needed to be reminded that you don't have to move, that your seat is confirmed, that you earned your place, that the right person will see that and say you're right, it was always yours, then I'm glad. I really, truly am. Take care of yourselves. Until the next one.